Hello, third graders. I have put together this fast review of Unit 4, Ancient Rome, so that we can remember what we learned before our Thanksgiving break. So if you look at this map of the world, you can see the United States. We live over here towards the East Coast, about right there, right under the S at the end of states. Okay. And if you go across the Atlantic Ocean, you'll find the continent of Europe. Right? We live in the continent of North America, and Europe is across the Atlantic Ocean, whereas the British say across the pond. All right, and then so you have Europe here, and then in the Mediterranean Sea that we see right here, we have the country of Italy, and Italy juts out like this. It is called a peninsula. So any landform that juts out and has water on three sides is called a peninsula. People say that Italy is kind of shaped like a boot. Okay, and in the country of Italy, we have the city of Rome, and we're talking about ancient Rome. All right, so the Romans built a civilization that controlled most of present-day Western Europe, as well as large parts of present-day Asia and Africa. So you can see on the map is a good text feature that helps us understand what we're learning. You can see in yellow the parts of the world that Rome actually controlled, the Roman Empire. So an empire is bigger than just like a country. It's a lot of land that a group of people, a civilization, conquers and is in charge of. It took many years to build this vast empire. That is why the saying, Rome wasn't built in a day, has come to refer to the creating of something that is large or complicated, that takes much time and dedication. So this is figurative language. It's not literal. It's not actually talking about Rome being not built in a day, right? People say that to you when you're doing something that's hard, to say, well, you can't just do it all at once. You have to take time and try your best. Rome wasn't built in a day. As their empire spread, the Romans also spread their culture or way of life, including their laws, art, architectural influences, language, and knowledge. Although most ancient Romans buildings are now ruins or are completely gone, Roman culture changed the world in ways we continue to see today. All right? So how do we know anything about ancient Rome? It was so long ago. Like, how do we know anything? Well, archaeologists look at artifacts that they find. So artifacts are different pieces of art or tools or things that have still been left and dug up from ancient Rome. So here you can see a picture of a wagon and a vase that was created in ancient Rome. We can look and see the pictures on it and see what the Romans wore and what they did in their everyday life. So artifacts are really important for understanding history. One thing that allowed Rome to spread so far and wide was its system of roads. In many conquered areas, the Romans built paved roads for their armies and to make traveling and trading easier. These roads were able to last many years because they were made with concrete, a hard, strong material made by mixing water with cement, sand, and pebbles and allowing the mixture to harden. The Romans were the first to invent this particular concrete mixture that we still use today in modern times, right? So that's one thing that the Romans gave us was roads and concrete, right? And that's why they say all roads lead to Rome, because there were so many roads the Romans built in all the different cities and countries that they conquered, and they all led back to Rome. All right, so we also learned the legend of Romulus and Remus and how Rome was started. If you remember, a legend is a story that could be based on some fact. Some people believe that it's true and it's passed down from generation to generation orally, which means that they just told the story to each other. So, in the legend of Romulus and Remus were twin baby boys, as you can see in this illustration here. All right, according to legend, the twins were the sons of the Roman god of war, Mars. You see in this illustration the god looking at what's happening. He's looking down, right? Where else have you heard the name Mars? That's right, that's where we got the name of our planet Mars in our solar system. All right, so the twin boys had an uncle who was a king, and the uncle was worried that because they were the sons of the god Mars, that they would try and take over his land that he was king of. And so he sent a servant to kill them, right, to murder the baby boys so that they couldn't take over his land. But the servant had his own kids, and he did not want to kill the baby boys, so he tried to save them. So to save them, he put them in a basket and stuck them in the Tiber River, right? And the legend says that Tiberius, the god of the Tiber River, helped guide the twins in their basket to safety, and they ended up landing on the bank of the river and being adopted by a wolf, a she wolf. And they were raised like they were her puppies and became part of her family until one day the wolf saw a shepherd and showed the shepherd the boys, and the shepherd ended up raising the twins, Romulus and Remus. Well, Romulus and Remus grew up, and when they grew up, they decided they didn't like all the kings and the fighting that was going on. And so they and a group of their friends went off on their own to start their own city, right? And they decided to build their city on a hill, right? Cities were built on hills back then to make protection, right? Because if you're up on a hill, it's harder for your enemy to come attack you, and you can see everybody that's coming at you, right? So the problem was, like many brothers do, Romulus and Remus didn't get along all the time, and they couldn't agree on which hill to build their city on. Right? So they both decided to go their own ways and go to their own hills and think about it. And they both saw vultures coming around their hill. First, Romulus, I believe, saw 6 vultures, and then Remus saw 12. So Romulus thought his was a sign from the gods because he saw them first. And then Remus thought his was a sign from the gods because he saw more vultures. So they decided to start building their own cities. Okay? So they started building, and one brother came to visit the other, and they got upset and made fun of each other's cities. And who killed who? Well, Romulus killed Remus, right? Because we have Rome, which comes from the word Romulus. Rome is named after Romulus. So Romulus killed Remus and created the city of Rome. All right, so we heard about this legend of Romulus and Remus, and then the god Mars and Tiberius. And then we're going to hear some myths. So what's the difference between a legend and a myth? Well, a legend is loosely based on something that might be true, and it explains like how something started, and some people believe it's true, and it was handed down from generation to generation. Whereas a myth is is stories associated with the belief of a particular group of people, and it explains why people act a certain way, why things are the way they are, or how things happen in nature. All right, so we might consider myths fiction, but actually Romans believed in the gods and goddesses, and they actually worshipped them, and it was their religion, right? Because they believed in more than one god, they are polytheistic. Remember, we talked about if you believe in more than one god, you're polytheistic. If you believe in one god, you're monotheistic. All right, so this is a picture of an elaborate temple, like an elaborate temple to Saturn. And the Romans built these temples to help worship their gods. All right, they'd go there and worship them and give them sacrifices and have parties for them. Priests would be there dedicated to that god. All right. So the Greeks also had gods and goddesses, and the gods and goddesses that the Greeks had were very similar to the Romans. Look at this map. It's a good text feature to help us and think about why would they have very similar gods and goddesses? Well, they had this similar climate, right? They were very close together in the Mediterranean Sea. So they would have the same kind of weather and different things would happen. So they'd think very similar things. And then also they traded together and ran into each other and talked to each other and learned about each other's gods and kind of they intermingled that way with the gods. Right, in this chart, which is also a very good text feature, we see the different Greek gods' names and different Roman gods' names and how similar they are, right? So the Greeks believed in a god named Zeus as the king of the gods, while the Romans' king of the gods was named Jupiter. Right? Apollo was the god of the sun, music, healing, and knowledge for the Greeks, and also for the Romans, they had the same name for that one. Okay, so it's interesting to see how similar they are. Right, you can also notice that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different names of planets from the Roman gods that we have today. Right, the Greeks and the Romans believed that some of the gods lived in a palace on the top of Mount Olympus in Greece. These beings were known as the Olympian gods. Okay, so what was the government like in Rome? Well, Rome actually became a republic. So at first, Rome was governed by different kings, but then the people rose up and didn't like being told what to do by different kings that they didn't even vote for or want. So they created a republic, and in the republic, they had 300 senators that were voted for, right? And they got to decide the laws and the different things. And then they were 2 consuls, and the consuls were kind of in charge. They had to agree on different things to make laws, and they were voted on by the people in the republic. Right? There were different classes of people in Rome. So that people were divided into these different groups. They had different rights and privileges under the law. The smallest and most powerful group was called the patricians. Patricians were Rome's elite, a small group of wealthy, powerful people who owned large homes in the city, vineyards in the country, and villas on the coast. The patricians were citizens of Rome, meaning they had the right to vote, and they had certain protections and privileges under the law. Because they were the most educated and privileged group, the patricians were also the ones most likely to become senators, so they got to make a lot of the laws in the Roman Empire. All right, so they were like the rich elite, the patricians. And then we have what is called the plebeians. Okay, so the plebeians were your second-class citizens. They didn't have all the rights and privileges enjoyed by the patricians. However, they had one big advantage. There were more of them. Numbers. There were more plebeians than there were patricians. So the patricians had to keep the plebeians happy so that they wouldn't overthrow them and take over. Okay, patricians and plebeians were both citizens and could both vote. However, they were subject to a different set of laws. All right, so for instance, a patrician could freely insult and even attack a plebeian, but a plebeian would be in big trouble if he did the same to a patrician. And then we have another group, the lowest group of the Roman Empire, were the slaves. They were not considered citizens of Rome, so they could not vote. They belonged to their owners, so they did not have the freedom to do as they pleased. Slaves could not choose where to live or work. They had no choice in what job they got to do, and they were not allowed to quit the jobs their owners gave them. Roman slaves did have some rights. For instance, Roman slaves were allowed to receive as much education as they needed to be better at what their job was. And then after some time, they could actually work hard for their owner to earn their freedom. And once they were given their freedom, their children were considered citizens of Rome. Right? So the slaves actually came from people that the Romans had conquered. So the Romans would go out and take over other lands, and they would make the people that were already there the slaves. All right, so that is our review of Rome. And then you need to answer the few questions at the end, and I hope this was a good way to jog your memory.